Hello again, 102. In this video we will go over the early New Deal, the first New Deal, and give you some background on who was Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was born in 1882, the adored only child of wealthy aristocratic parents. Young Franklin Roosevelt enjoyed a pampered life. He was educated by tutors at Hyde Park, his father's Hudson River estate north of New York City, and he attended Harvard and Columbia Law. And while a law student, he married Anna Eleanor Roosevelt, a niece of his fifth cousin, Theodore Roosevelt, then President of the United States. And Roosevelt seemed destined for greatness. And then a tragedy occurred. In 1921, at the age of 39, he contracted polio, which left him permanently disabled, unable to stand, as I mentioned in the previous video, without braces. And for 7 years, aided by his remarkable wife, Eleanor, Roosevelt strengthened his body to compensate for his disability, and the long battle for recovery transformed the young aristocrat. He became less arrogant, less superficial, more focused, and more interesting. A friend recalled that Roosevelt emerged from his struggle with polio completely warm-hearted, with a new humility of spirit that led him to identify with the poor and the suffering that took place. And in 1928 and 1930, Roosevelt won the governorship of New York. The aristocrat had developed a common touch as well as a great talent for public relations, but he was also vain and calculating, a clever manipulator of others. In other words, he was a master politician. And this is a picture of FDR getting ready to make one of his fireside chats. And it's hard to fit some of these pictures in here sometimes. And the 1933 inauguration, he confessed in his inaugural address that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. And to deal with the crisis, he asked Congress for a broad executive power to wage a war against the emergency, just as if we were in fact invaded by a foreign foe. Roosevelt's uplifting speech won rave reviews. Nearly 500,000 Americans wrote letters to the new president after his inauguration. And the 100 days are very famous in American history. Unprecedented moves. And these are the goals of the first New Deal, ladies and gentlemen. Relief, recovery, and reform. Through all of these measures, these are three simultaneous goals that are going to be attempted by the FDR administration. And to advise him about options, the new president assembled a brain trust of brilliant specialists, many of them college professors, who feverishly developed fresh ideas to address the nation's urgent problems. I'm not the smartest fellow in the world, Roosevelt admitted, but I sure can pick smart colleagues. And in the first New Deal, there's going to be a cluster of economic and social programs designed to combat the Great Depression. Banking regulation is the first thing that they tackle. And soon after taking office, Roosevelt called Congress into an emergency session to pass the Emergency Banking Relief Act, which declared a week-long bank holiday to allow the financial panic to subside. And in the first, as we mentioned, of his radio fireside chats, Roosevelt is a master of this medium. He uses radio spectacularly all through his presidency to convey his messages, to go public, in other words, with his ideas over the airwaves. And 60 million people were informed that it's safer to keep your money in a reopened bank than under your mattress. And his reassurances soothed the nervous nation. And the following day, people took their money back to banks. And capitalism was saved in 8 days, said one of Roosevelt's advisors. It's one of his greatest accomplishments. The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation was established to prevent bank panics and to guarantee the safety of deposits up to a certain amount in citizens' savings accounts. And in addition to ensuring savings accounts, the Glass-Steagall Act, part of the Banking Act of 1933, called for the separation of commercial banking from investment banking in order to prevent banks from investing the savings of depositors in risky stock market schemes. And this will be eroded, as we'll see later in the semester. In the late 1990s, a lot of these regulations will be eliminated once again. And only banks that specialized in investment could trade in the stock market after 1933. In addition, the Federal Reserve Board was given more authority to intervene in future financial emergencies. And these steps ended the banking crisis. Regulating Wall Street was next, and the Securities and Exchange Commission, still around today, was established that attempts to regulate the issuance and trading of stocks and bonds in an effort to avoid financial panics and stock market crashes. Margin buying is largely gone today, especially to the scale that it was done on in 1929. Roosevelt next convinced Congress to pass the Economy Act, allowing him to cut government workers' salaries, reduce payments to military veterans for non-service connected disabilities, and to reorganize federal agencies, all in order to reduce government expenses. And finally, to end the early New Deal, he then took the dramatic step of ending Prohibition, in part because it was being so widely violated, and in part because most Democrats wanted it ended, and in part because he wanted to regain those tax revenues from the sale of alcoholic beverages. And the 21st Amendment, ratified on December the 5th, 1933, ended Prohibition. And in the next segment, we'll end the first New Deal.